Go ahead, Catherine. Thanks.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Blakemore. I'm a former legal aid lawyer for my entire legal career, but now I have the privilege of being the chair of the California Access to Justice Commission. And we're very excited that all of you have joined us to learn about the grants. I'll just start by saying these grants are in part possible because of the amazing work that legal aid does and the legislature's great appreciation for all of the work that you do. And we have been able to use the many examples of the grants that we have funded for infrastructure as well as innovation as a way to persuade the legislature that this program should continue. They're very excited about the work that gets done under this grant. So I'll just start with a big thank you to all of you who do the work day in and day out. So thank you for that. It's my pleasure to talk a little bit about the goals for today. We want to clarify the purpose of the grant so that you have an understanding of eligibility requirements. We want to encourage you to apply. Please don't self-select out of the opportunity. We hopefully can inspire you to realize that infrastructure and innovation might go beyond what you actually think of those. We now, because this is our fourth year, have some really good examples of what that can look like. And this is an opportunity to hear from some of your peers who have successfully had projects funded and learn about their successes, challenges, and learnings. So that's what we hope to achieve with all of you today. And it's really my pleasure to introduce our grants team. Two of the folks have been here from the very beginning, and that's Stephanie Choi and Mary Tam. So thank you. Celeste, I think, has been with us for 2 or 3 years now, and is the person that knows SharePoint inside and out, which is the tool you'll use to apply for the grant. And we are really fortunate this year to have Tila Chalmers join us as the person that's managing this project. I know many of you know her from all of her great work in the legal services ecosystem for probably decades, I would say. So we're really excited about the grants team that we have leading this this year. It's really strong. I want to just give you a sense of the grants that we received last year that we ended up funding. So you can see that in year 3, what happened with the approved grants and the amounts of the grants. So our grants, and this is fairly consistent over the years, can be quite small to meet a specific need a program has about an infrastructure need, for example, and then all the way up to a much larger grant that is taking on a project. Often those grants are grants that either take on a significant issue or are a collaboration among more than one program. We received 84 applications last year, 44 were funded. 41% of the grant applications were new, 59 were returning. You can see there's a mix of IOLTA and non-IOLTA funded programs. And then in the little box under geography, you can get a sense of where those grants do their primary work. The priority factors are the ones that the legislature has identified as a focus of this grant. So the focuses are that it intended to serve people from rural communities, immigrants, and programs that work in collaboration with other community-based organizations. And then innovation and infrastructure, you'll see there's a mix. 27% last year were for infrastructure, 9% were all innovation, and many of them, the majority you can see, were mixed. They had elements of both that connected together to be one cohesive project. So what we're going to cover are the grants basics. What does innovation mean? What does that look like? What does infrastructure look like? Some application tips, how to use Smart Simple, the timeline, and then leave time for questions and answers so that you can get your questions and answers answered. I think someone's also monitoring the chat. So if you have a question, feel free to also ask it in there. And with that, welcome and thank you for joining.
Thanks so much, Catherine, for kicking us off. Again, welcome everyone. And yes, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Tila's going to be monitoring that, and we'll politely interject when it makes sense. And then we'll also save time at the end for Q&A to get to that. So for those of you who have joined us for an informational webinar before, this is probably going to look and sound very familiar. Total funds have not changed from last year, and the grant size is also the same. So as Catherine mentioned, ranging from 25,000 to 250,000. There have been one or two instances where a grant was larger than that, but that's because it was a collaboration of more than one organization. So the only time where it's been more than 250,000 is when there was, 3 or 4 organizations collaborating together. Most of the grants, at least based on last year, are likely going to be in the $50,000 to $150,000 range. And then the grant period, again, as last year, will start next year, April 1st. And again, as Catherine mentioned, the grants are intended to support the infrastructure and innovation needs of legal services organizations. They can focus on one or the other or both. And to be honest, a lot of projects really do kind of cross over between infrastructure and innovation. And we have some fantastic speakers here today to share their projects. And we have them kind of placed under infrastructure or innovation to help give folks a sense of the types of projects. But again, it's not always a clear-cut line. And we really encourage folks to think about this as an opportunity to be strategic about expanding service delivery systems as well, thinking about it as being able to have a lasting impact beyond just the lifespan of the grant. Eligibility is also the same as last year. So applicants do need to be 501c3 nonprofits that provide civil legal aid. You do not need to qualify for IOLTA funds or LSC funds. Of course, we welcome that, but you don't need to. That's one common misconception. Applicants do need to provide civil legal services to indigent persons, and that's defined as living at or below 200% of the federal poverty threshold. There's also a little bit of additional, this is per the B&P code's definition, and so there's also seniors and persons with certain disabilities included in there. We actually have an FAQ on the Cal A to J website. So if you go to I'll drop this in the chat, but if you go to the website and scroll down, there's a number of FAQs down here if you haven't seen those. So let me drop this in here. And then lastly, we have a few focus areas that are the same as previous years. These are legislative focus areas. So serving rural communities, immigrant communities, and then projects that have really strong partnerships with community-based organizations. Restrictions are also the same as previous years, so funding is not available even though infrastructure, we might think of a building right away to pay for construction costs. You also are not able to supplant existing resources, meaning it's prohibited by legislation to use funds if funds have been appropriated for that exact same purpose.
Mary,
yeah.
hang on one second. Your sharing, I think, ended when you copied the.
Oh, thank you so much, Tila. Appreciate the backup. And then lastly, funding cannot be used for fundraising purposes. So for example, you can't hire a development director, but that said, if you're making changes to your CMS, and that is obviously going to benefit fundraising activities, then that is allowed. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tila to talk a little bit about what we mean by innovation, and just want to echo what Catherine said. So happy to have you on the team, Tila. And also, I think it's extremely valuable to have someone who actually has gone through the application process. So having that firsthand information about the receiving end of the experience. So welcome. Thanks, Tila.
Thanks so much. It's really quite a pleasure to be a part of this amazing team and to get to see the other side of this. As Mary mentioned, my previous organization, Legal Access Alameda, applied for and received grants, these grants for different projects, and I wrote 2 of the applications. So it's very fun to be on the other side of it. So innovation, one of my favorite topics. I'm not going to read you this slide, but you can imagine sort of new ideas. The whole origin of this money included the sense that we often don't have enough luxury of funding to really innovate. We've got our heads down. We're trying to keep doing what we're doing. This is intended to give you some resources to explore new ideas that you have had and just haven't had the ability to actualize, as the slide says. Today, you're going to hear from a number of projects, but you'll also see links to other ideas on our website. So please check those out and take the luxury of putting up your feet and having a dream or two about what you would love to do if only there was the funding.
Thanks, Tila. So we can talk all day about innovation, but what's really more meaningful is to have you folks hear from your peer organizations about some of the projects that they're actually doing. And so I want to welcome Panita Jonesa with Thai Community Development Center to kick us off. Welcome, Panita.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today. So with our project, we actually were able to utilize an existing program that we have called the Asian Pacific Islander Human Trafficking Task Force. And with that task force, because it was already existing, we had a lot of partners that were in the law enforcement field as well as the victim service provider field. And we actually are now able to provide services in the field. If we could go to the next slide. And provide the legal services right then and there when law enforcement officers have interventions such as execution of search warrants, anytime they suspect there might be human trafficking. Traditionally, legal service providers are waiting for these referrals or for our clients to call hotlines so that we can screen them. But we found out that there is a huge gap in identification, and that's really in the field, because when victims of human trafficking are interfacing with law enforcement, they're actually super scared, super intimidated, don't want to say anything, and many of those referrals never come through, even if they truly are victims of trafficking. So in this way, we're actually able to fund a task force coordinator to better work with these partners that we had developed over time, but in a different setting, and also to make our services mobile and truly bring, the legal consultations where they're needed most, and have a setting where they can have a private conversation so that, we can take them away from that kind of law enforcement interaction and then say, hey, we're here to help you. And, what you say to us is private and confidential and free of charge. Next slide. So I actually wanted to showcase one of the cases that we had worked on recently. It's still in the works, but what happened was we received a client in the API Human Trafficking Task Force through one of our partners, which was Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. And I remember when they called us, they're like, which law enforcement should we report to? And law enforcement actually relies on us for cases and tips and whatnot as well. So one of the partners we work very closely with, especially because this had occurred in Orange County, is Homeland Security Investigations. And we had a really good experience working on a large scale case with them. So we said, okay, let's report to Homeland Security Investigations and see where it goes. And it turned out that this case blew up. It wasn't just the one client, but it was actually a cannabis farm in Orange County where they told us there could be up to 80 victims of trafficking working and living there. And so we were able to mobilize our partners in Orange County as well as our partners in LA to go down there, because these were very specific Asian languages that are very difficult to find people who are trained up on working on human trafficking. So we're able to also train additional partners. And we provided services to victims in Thai, Khmer, and Laotian right after law enforcement went in. And we were able to kind of take them out and away to what we used was a church that was nearby. That was one of the community partners. And you can kind of see how we had to kind of set up this huge operation on our end just to make sure that everything was working out, so they could get all of their resources and benefits and legal screenings the way it was supposed to work. So you see a couple pictures there of our whole group, and then some with the law enforcement partners that we had worked with.
Thank you so much, Panita. Such a wonderful example of those deep and meaningful partnerships. And also, I think it's really great because a lot of times we hear innovation and we think automatically, oh, it has to do with technology, but you can be really innovative in terms of the service delivery model and being able to fill a need gap. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Panita. Next, I want to welcome Eleni Wolf with Immigrant Legal Defense.
Thanks so much. Good to be here with you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about one aspect of ILD's work, which is our educational legal partnerships. And in the next slide, talk a little bit more in depth about the project that's specifically funded by this grant, which is very exciting because it's a project we've been trying to get off the ground for a couple of years. So this grant has made it possible to do so. One of the way that we deliver immigration legal services is by partnering with school-based systems in order to reach people in an accessible and convenient way, and also to have this wealth of support that can come from school system networks. ILD has worked for a number of years on developing these partnerships, both at the higher educational level and at the K through 12 level. So this grant specifically is helping to fund our work in West Contra Costa school system, and specifically at the International Academy. If you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. Thanks. What this grant has allowed us to do is to help us form a formal relationship with Oakland International High School's Learning Lab, which is a specific group that has come up to help school systems deal with newcomer non-citizen students, and to be able to share their expertise with other school systems. So this grant brings together both a legal partnership and educational resources for the school in order for us to be able to set up a partnership with them in order for our attorneys to be able to access clients and students for ongoing immigration legal services, and partners so that the school resources are best used with all of the wraparound services that they're in a much better place to provide. Through this project, we've been able to fund attorneys at ILD to work on this, and we're also able to fund part of a position that's based at the school district, whose job is really to liaison with us and the students and to help us set up legal clinics, which are now happening every other month at the school, and are making it so that we can begin to work through the backlog of students who have existed at the school system who haven't had access ever to immigration legal services, even though they potentially could have qualified for immigration relief years ago. The other part of this funding, which is really exciting, is that it is allowing us to create some best practices. And in the spring, we're going to be having a conference for California school systems statewide to be able to help other school systems set up immigration legal services partnerships for their non-citizen students, and to work to provide technical assistance that's based individually on what's happening within that school system. I didn't put this information on this slide, but through this project already, in less than a year, we've been able to identify over 120 students who qualified for immigration relief and have been able to move forward on filing for relief in many of their cases. And part of the reason that we've been able to do so quickly is because, again, since we have all this trust that we're building on, that we get to benefit from working directly with the schools, we're able to just come in and work on their legal cases right away. And some of them are quite time sensitive because kids age out of immigration relief at 18 and then again at 21. It's also been really exciting that the county school system itself, since we were able to come in and actually have some dedicated funding for this work, is now motivated to potentially raise money from within the county to start to make the position that's funded through this grant at the school a permanent position that ultimately will be publicly funded through the school system itself. So that's really exciting. I could go on, but I know I'm at time, so I'll stop. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much for sharing, Eleni. And again, wonderful to see these expanded and very intentional partnerships. And it speaks to you folks being able to jump right in because that trust is established, and also meeting the youth and the students where they're at. So thank you so much for sharing. With that, we are going to transition from innovation to some infrastructure examples. And so I want to invite go ahead, Tila.
Sorry, before you do that, we have a couple of questions. First of all, Eleni, can you explain how we can learn more about the upcoming conference?
Yes, we're working on the registration link, and as soon as we have it, we're happy to share with Mary or Taylor, whoever, to get it out to this network in the best, however you think. It'll also be on our social media. But as soon as we have the registration link, we'll provide it.
Thank you. And I've been trying to answer questions in the chat, but Mary, can organizations apply for multiple grants, like one for innovation and one for infrastructure, for things that are different?
It's one grant, and we will get to a section in terms of more specifics on applications, but it does need to be one application per organization.
And it has to have some connection.
Yes.
The pieces must have some connection.
Yes,
Okay.
so I'll talk
And
about that in a bit, but yeah, thank you.
You listed the 3 priority factors. Will proposals that are not in those 3 priority areas receive consideration, or do you have to fall
Absolutely.
within? Okay.
Yes, it's just that we know that those are legislative priorities, and so there's a little bit of like bonus points, and we'll talk about you know, the scoring structure and how applications are sort of reviewed at a later point in the webinar today.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Tila, for hopping in. And yeah, just so folks know, Tila's answering straightforward questions in the chat as they come in. She'll also interject whenever it makes sense. And then again, we will save maybe some of the more complicated questions for the end of the webinar. And with that, I will pass it over to my esteemed colleague, Stephanie, to talk a little bit about infrastructure.
Great. So we talked about innovation. Infrastructure really often is thought of as capacity building. It's what you need to do to bring your nonprofit to the next level of maturity. So in the past, we've received grant applications that say, we really don't have enough attorneys to provide the services that we need, so we need to build our capacity by hiring another attorney. So if you think about it in terms of, does that hire make a difference, not just for this year, but for the future? That's what we want to see, is how are you going to improve your organizational structure in such a way that you'll make a difference for future years, not just by hiring another person to obviously be able to provide more services this year. And those services can be any number of areas. You know, often it's operational, it's technology, either hardware or software improvements, or it's programmatic, you know, a new intake system or a new way to do to address pro bono and recruit more pro bono attorneys. It could also be strategic planning or improving your financial systems, or making sure that your organization is conscious of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So could be any number of different areas. It really is just looking at, how can I get funds this year that are going to make a difference in my efficiency or effectiveness in the years following? And the other thing to keep in mind is, it does not only have to be infrastructure to your organization alone. It could be improving the infrastructure of the legal aid community as a whole. So strong partnerships, development of resources, intake, shared intake, And what follows will be some examples of how infrastructure grants have been implemented in the past.
Thanks, Stephanie. Also, just a quick note, and Stephanie's going to talk about resources a little bit later in the presentation, but on the Cal A to J website, there actually is a resource of sample projects in there for both infrastructure and innovation. With that, I would like to invite our first infrastructure speaker, Danny Clark with Immigration Institute of the Bay Area.
Hi, I'm Danny with Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. And I would like to talk about the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area helps immigrant refugees and their families join and contribute to the community. And we do that by providing low or no cost legal services. And so I was brought in this year as the volunteer manager to develop the infrastructure of a volunteer program so that we could build the capacity to help more non-English and non-Spanish speakers. Because one of the things we noticed at IIBA is that we were helping majority clients who are Spanish speaking, and we were ending up having to turn away people who did not speak Spanish or English. But since the Bay Area is so large and has such a diverse community, we wanted to be able to help everybody, not just a specific community or specific people. So next slide, please. So far in Q1, we have recruited 42 new volunteers, including 11 different languages. There are definitely some Spanish speakers, but we have been able to bump up the amount of languages that are spoken by these interpreters. And then also we developed and implemented orientation and training for these interpreter volunteers so that we can retain them and then also build this interpreter group so that it's going to be expanded over the years. And then what they're doing, they've been interpreting for consultations, they've been interpreting in our nationalization clinics. They've also been translating documents, which is huge. That's actually a project that we foresee is going to help other organizations as well. We currently have about 4 or 5 volunteers right now who are translating the N400 document into other languages, which has been really helpful for our organization so far. And then we hope in the next quarter to actually specialize recruitment for a couple of communities that we are seeking interpreters for specifically. That way we will be able to continue to build access to more clients. And then I just threw up here a couple of ways how I've had success in the past recruiting volunteers from specific communities in case that's helpful for anyone. And so that is where we are now with building the infrastructure for a new volunteer program.
Thank you so much, Danny. It's also a good reminder of, or an example, I should say, of what Stephanie was talking about, where, it's not just bringing in a staff person that can serve additional people within a year, but you folks have been developing training materials, orientation materials, translations, and all of that volunteer infrastructure is going to serve the organization beyond just the 1-year grant period. So
exactly.
Thanks so much.
Yes. And that is my contact information in case anybody has questions.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Love all the languages in there as well. It's a great visual. And now I'd like to invite Caitlin Chan to join us with Legal Assistance for Seniors.
Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Chan. I'm the Executive Director at Legal Assistance for Seniors. And our project was to do a case management transition. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we have been using Kemp's case management system since 1991. It is a very outdated and cumbersome platform. And, as our services, funding sources, workflows, and data collection needs have changed over the decades, really. Our various IT staff had added all of these customizations and tweaks, and it ultimately made the most routine tasks very complicated both for program and finance, and really has inhibited our ability to really come into the 21st century in a number of ways. There also was a specific time limit on this. This project had been kind of hanging over our heads since we knew that KEMPS is built on the 32-bit version of Microsoft Access. It's unclear how long that will be supported, how much notice we'll have, and there are a couple other things that were making that really increasingly unsustainable. So we are very excited to be able to use this funding to get a new case management system. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the project was really to put together this project team to kind of see what it is that we need right now, and we'll need over the next 5 to 10 years, vet multiple case management system vendors to find the best fits, and to go through this whole customization and selection process and migrate all of our old data to the new system, train staff, all of that. So, this is really such an exciting funding source. Like, no one else wants to fund this, right? Like, this is not this exciting, sexy project that we can that most funders want, something that's like new and shiny and is really focused on the clients. And I really appreciate this funding source, these grants really acknowledge how much this just does affect the client service. So that we serve older adults, and our service model is to be very high touch. We have long in-person appointments, we do home visits. Our staff time is so valuable and so spread thin. And as I'm sure you all know, it's very difficult to recruit and retain attorneys. And if they're bogged down in all these things that aren't serving the clients, it kind of just contributes to stress and this mental load. If you could go to the next slide, please. So, what we were really looking to do is to be able to allow program staff to capture this data very quickly and efficiently, and have them spend more time on substantive work, to be able to really allocate. Also, we discovered that that all these capabilities that we didn't even know were possible, right? Of not going on the finance side as well, in terms of allocating staff time very quickly and easily to different funding sources, making all of these reporting and systems and processes so much more efficient, getting greater insights both into our funding and grant billing, as well as getting more insight into who we're serving, outcomes, really be able to be nimble when we get a new funding source, or when we're wanting to see, like, is this program working? Do we need to shift our focus a little bit with what's happening in the community? So it's really, ultimately going to allow us to be more responsive to the community's needs. So we're very, very excited about putting all of these efficiencies in place and allowing us to be really more data driven in a lot of different ways.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I think this is a really great example, and to your point, it may not be a big, fancy, shiny thing, but I think that's a misconception, is that you have to come with some big, crazy idea in order to get funding, and that's not necessarily the case. Anyone who's worked in legal aid, using an outdated CMS knows how frustrating it can be when you have to click through multiple times, or, and all those reasons that you mentioned. It takes away time with clients. It's frustrating for staff. And so projects like this are equally important. And again, to your point, underfunded. So thank you so much, Caitlin. And now we welcome Sunny No with Legal Aid of Sonoma.
Hi, it's Legal Aid of Sonoma County.
Oh, my bad. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem. Hi, I'm the Deputy Director at Legal Aid of Sonoma County. So our project is not very sexy, but it was incredibly important and valuable for us to get funding to do this work. So Legal Aid of Sonoma County, we're the only civil legal services organization that's dedicated to the county. It's a big geographic county, so a great deal of need. And historically had been a relatively small organization. After the fires in Northern California in 2017 and 19, the organization grew significantly. And then again, during COVID, we grew significantly again. And so we have been trying to adapt to the growth of our programs and of our staff. So we now have over 40 staff and over 12 programs, and I think historically had maybe around 10 staff members. So a significant increase for us. And so we had also had a management structure that was basically our executive director, an operations manager, a business manager, and then 2 supervising attorneys for all staff. And so that has been our existing management structure up until a few months ago. We also had struggled with recruitment and retention like every other organization, particularly during COVID, and particularly with trying to hire people from the community, hiring diverse candidates and retaining diverse candidates. And we had also come to this point where our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, our commitments to targeting communities of color in our grants, kind of like our anecdotal practices from a small organization no longer fit for the size of the organization that we now are. And so this grant was a huge opportunity for us, and it really was birthed. The origins of us actually applying for this grant cycle was we had been engaging in an effort to try to find a DEI trainer for our whole agency to do an intensive DEI training for the agency, and finding it was difficult to find really qualified trainers that we could afford. And so we recognized we needed to get funding to be able to do it, and that it was really important for us to do it. So you can go to the next slide. So we applied for the grant to help us engage more meaningfully in our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. What that looks like for us is, one, engaging in an agency-wide training with a qualified trainer, which means ideally somebody from the community, a person of color who is trained in this work. Also developing a DEI committee. It was really important for me that we did that in a way that wasn't superficial and just performative. And so making sure that we weren't asking staff of color to do 2 jobs for 1 salary, making sure we had the ability to compensate for them for their time participating, provide meals if we're asking them to work after hours. Yeah, so that was, we wanted to make sure we weren't, we wanted to make sure we weren't going to exploit our staff of color to ask them to do this extra work without getting compensated. And then from these things, we hope to start developing some new policies and procedures, or updating existing policies and procedures to be more reflective of our commitment. And at the same time, we've concurrently been engaging with an organizational management consultant to help us look at our infrastructure and how we might adjust our infrastructure to match the size of our organization and the needs of our organization, and having DEI as a lens in how we do that. So we've been, so far we have developed the committee. In Q1, we've developed the committee. We've started working together. We've been trying to find our footing. We've identified priorities for action items that the committee wants to work on and propose to management. We have been trying to get our DEI trainer. We have secured a quote from a DEI trainer in the community who we're really excited about. So we're trying to secure a date for that. And then we've started working with the organizational management consultant to look at our infrastructure and how we might adjust to meet the needs of our staff, and do it with the right lens, and do it in a way where we're really retaining qualified staff, and retaining diverse staff, and looking for opportunities just within the staff that we have.
Thank you so much, Sunny. And congratulations on finding your consultant, or identifying at least your consulting partners on that. Again, similar to the innovation examples, I think it's helpful, we might have ideas of what infrastructure means in our heads, and it might not necessarily mean a new phone system. It could be, to your point, being able to use a DEI lens as you're thinking about expanding infrastructure and capacity within an organization. So thanks again, Sunny, with Legal Aid of Sonoma County. And just want to, again, say thank you so much to all of our speakers for taking the time to be with us today and to share. I think it's super important. Again, we can talk all we want about infrastructure and innovation, but it's really probably much more helpful for all of the applicants to hear directly from you all. So now we're going to get to the application tips, and I will pause after the next couple of slides to see if there's questions that we want to answer that have come up in the chat. Scoring criteria is also the same as previous years. So the review committee will be looking at organizational vision, capacity, and ability to achieve project goals. Capacity, it doesn't necessarily mean who's on the board and how long has this organization been around. It could also mean, how strong are the organization's relationships with the community that it's serving. As well as the need for proposed services and population served. So how well does the proposal articulate the actual needs and the population that's going to be helped out with the project? The strength of the project to address specifically infrastructure or innovation needs, or in some cases both. The significance of proposed outcomes and impact. This also includes the budget. So kind of looking at the budget alongside and how the cost compares to the proposed outcomes and impact of the project. And then there's additional factors such as, whether it contributes to the larger legal aid ecosystem in California. And then I believe the question earlier, there are additional priority points for the legislative priorities. So the CBO partnerships and then organizations serving rural communities and or immigrant communities. But again, you do not need to serve one of those communities. You do not need to have CBO partnerships. It's just that there's additional points related to that based on the legislative priorities. Tila, were there any questions related to the scoring criteria before I move on?
We just got a question asking if you could define significant CBO partnerships.
There isn't one specific definition, but I would say, and please feel free to chime in, Stephanie and Catherine, that the project inherently relies upon the relationship with a community-based organization, that you're partnering with them to be able to reach clients, or you're partnering with them to be able to provide services. If it's something like your organization has, some partnerships, but they're not directly related to the project, then I don't think that would count as a significant CBO relationship. Stephanie or Catherine, did you want to elaborate on that at all, or Tila as well?
I think you captured it.
Okay, great. And again, we'll have more Q&A time at the end. A few of the application flags. So applicants do need to demonstrate that they provide civil legal services to people at or below 200% of the FPL, or as otherwise defined. One note is in the application, if you do plan to hire new staff or will have ongoing expenses to maintain the project after the end of the grant period, you'll be asked in the application how the organization plans to sustain the project beyond the 1-year period. And then there are purchasing policies at different levels. So whether it's $2,000, $10,000, or $25,000, there's different levels, and that purchasing policy is available on the resources page that we will bring up in a bit. I also want to really quickly, before I move on the scoring criteria, there's more information online, and I can drop this in the chat as well. So this gives you a little bit more information on the scoring criteria for anyone who wants to dive in and get really a little bit deeper on how proposals will be reviewed. This time I will go back to the actual deck, and thanks to the participants who flagged that previously. We also just wanted to lift up a few areas of confusion that have come up in the last couple of years. Applications do need to be a single project. So it might have more than one component, but there has to be some sort of cogent explanation of how the smaller components fit together to create a cohesive whole. And the commission may fund all of it, or they may fund part of that project. It doesn't serve an applicant to try to throw in 6 kind of seemingly unrelated areas. So if you're thinking, oh, it's $250K, so we'll throw in CMS upgrade and a DEI consultant and some new laptops and developing a community outreach plan, and there isn't really a clear through line, then it's not necessarily going to serve the application. Also, we did receive feedback that some applicants were under the impression you had to come up with, a big idea, a $250,000 idea in order to truly be competitive. And that's not the case. In year 3, so this past year, 33 of the 44 approved grants were for amounts of $150,000 or less. And then of those, the majority were actually under 100,000. And then there were 11 grants that were for amounts greater than 150,000. And this past year, we did not have any that were over 250,000. And then lastly, just want to reiterate that this is 1-year funding. I think some folks who applied for funding in a given year and then reapplied for funding for pretty much the same project or very similar in nature were confused as to, or wanted to know why it didn't get continuously funded. These are intended to be 1-year grants for infrastructure and innovation. It's not necessarily renewable, but at the same time, if there's something new, significantly new about the project, an expansion of it or a new element, then, you know, applicants are not precluded from applying for that. But if it's applying for essentially the same thing as the previous year, it's unlikely to be funded. And then I wanted to share, turn it over to Stephanie, and I will go to the actual grant resources page to talk through some of these that are available on the Cal A to J website.
Yes, so I want to encourage you all to look at the resources that are available in the first year of the grant. We culled all of the evaluation metrics that folks propose for the grant proposal, and you can look at it as an example of a way to benchmark and measure your success or the work, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can look at different ways that folks have proposed evaluating their projects in the past. By the same token, we looked at different infrastructure and innovation examples, and we provided examples here, although, you know, as the years go by, we're able to provide more examples from what grantees are actually doing. So pleased that we were able to showcase some of those today. And then the first section, every year we get a different array of grant proposals. So the project-based groupings aren't the same every year, but if you want to open the most recent one, Mary, project-based groupings for last year, a lot of you are doing really great work, and you can benefit from talking to each other. So what we've tried to do is categorize the different projects so that if you're doing a case management system, you can, for example, say, you know, I know that this organization has done it before, so I'll give them a call and talk to them about the work they've done and what they put into it. So it's really a tool for you all to collaborate with each other more effectively. And I would also want to say that there is a webinar coming up of grantees, Mobile Pathway, Ultralado, and CGRS on data security and advancing access to justice. So they're going to talk about collecting and portrayal of data, and that'll be September 19th, and the announcement's coming out soon.
And then the last things I'll flag, just because I had mentioned them earlier, is the scoring guide down here at the bottom left, and then purchasing policy information. And we have some links to Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project, LSNTAP, as well as TechSoup. Thanks, Stephanie. Now I would like to pass it over to another one of my esteemed colleagues, Celeste, to talk through Smart Simple.
Thank you, Mary. So if your organization has never applied for a grant through our Smart Simple portal before, you will go to the URL that's there. And I believe that's been in all of our announcement emails, and a lot of the communications we've put out is our URL for this. But you can see it there. So when you're here for the first time, you'll need to register, and you can see that new to the system section in the bottom left. There are also several videos put on by Mary herself that you can see the instructional videos. Hopefully they're very helpful to you if you have any questions or if the interface isn't intuitive at first. But once you register, you'll be able to see actually if your organization has already registered. If it is, you'll get the alert that's in the bottom right, and it will say, you know, please contact the person who completed your org profile to be added as a user. If you don't know who that is, or you're getting that alert and you think it's by mistake, please email myself and I'll be able to go in there and get you activated as a user or get your organization there. And you can see my email address just up there at the top, celestor.co@gmail.com. So the next slide is, once you do get into the system, you'll see this home portal. You'll see a couple of links there to the RFP and to our website, which Mary's been referring to today. You can also see the recorded webinar. That's a link there. We'll put the recording to this webinar in that place as soon as we have it ready for you. But what you really need to be focused on is two things. The first thing is actually that all applications icon. It has the number 13 there. For this is a test organization, obviously. So first check there that no one else in your organization has created an application for this cycle, because as Mary mentioned before, only one application per organization this time. And then when you're ready to create your new application, you'll just click Start a New Application and then Save Draft. So next slide. One of the first things we would love for you to do whenever when you know you want to apply for this cycle is to actually communicate to us your responsible contacts for your organization. So I've flagged that here. It's on your organization profile is where you will give us this information. And please, throughout your grant application, and also if you are funded throughout the grant period, we would love for you to keep those updated, because those are going to be the people that get copied on your grant communications. Mary, if you can go back one slide, I just want to point out how to get to this is in the bottom at the organization profile icon. You actually will access that through your organization profile, and that's how you give us your contacts. So now you can go forward 2 slides. We have a bit of a change for the uploads and also the agreements that we ask you for each grant cycle. In past years, we have actually requested those items on your organization profile, just like we do the contacts. But this time, we are only going to ask you for that information during the supplemental information phase, and we are actually only going to open those fields for those who will be conditionally approved or asked to move forward into the next round of consideration. So you'll see that information missing from your organization profile, and you'll see the fields there on the supplemental info tab, but they will not be open until the conditional approvals phase. I think I have one more slide. Is if you have a question about your all-time grant history as an organization, if you're new, or if you're not sure if your organization has applied in the past, you can click that dashboard icon in the upper right of your portal. And I think that's it, unless there are questions about Smart Simple.
Tila, any burning questions about Smart Simple before I move on?
Not a one.
Okay, great. And we will share Celeste's contact information again at the end of the presentation in case folks want to note that down. So back to you, Tila.
All right. So I'm new at this, but I'm excited to share with you the timeline for this year 4, let's call it. So, the application is already available online, and you've learned about how to access that. Applications are due September 20th. So please do get them in by that date. Of course, getting them in before is perfectly lovely. We will then spend October through January reviewing them. There is a selection committee that reviews them exhaustively, and those decisions go up the chain to be reviewed again. And what comes out of that is conditional approvals of grants. So what that basically means is some of you will get a notice saying you've been conditionally approved. Some of you will get a notice saying, sorry, not this year. For those of you who are conditionally approved, you're approved assuming that all the documents come in, right? the budget, the other supporting and organizational documents that we ask you for. There are supplemental questions related to those. That's a different part of the application that, as Celeste pointed out, you'll only be able to access after the conditional approval. So we'll let you'll get that news on January 17th, 2025. And the supplemental information will be due February 10th, 2025. And then final awards will be announced February 21st. And the grant period begins April 1st. Justine, thank you again for pointing out that one piece of information says the grant starts this past April. It does not. So we will correct that, but this is the timeline. Happy to answer any questions in the chat about the timeline. We know that, and if you could put any questions in the chat, that would be easier just because this is such a big webinar. We know that, you know, it can be hard to hire people, and if your proposal involves hiring people, we hope that you'll be able to burst out of the box. But with hiring, and you will, of course, have your conditional approval, so you'll know that it's likely to come. That would be my suggestion as someone who has struggled with that in the past.
It looks like Maria may have a question about the timeline. Do you want to unmute yourself?
And
You're still muted.
Sorry,
No worries.
hi everyone. I just have a quick question. I was actually typing it in the chat. So this past year we applied, and I think the question that I have is, we didn't necessarily, I believe, get a conditional award, but we also didn't get like this very clear rejection. Is there folks in that sort of fluffy zone, and what should we interpret it as?
You all can jump in, but my understanding is that's a slight shift from last year, that we didn't send out "so sorry," but this year we're going to do our best to say "so sorry," so that you know something a little more definitively a little sooner. I suppose it's theoretically possible that you could have been the next one on the list and someone in the conditional list fails. Area. So what that means is you would know then that you had been, you know, right on the list and then got in, but I think we agreed that that's probably better for you to know earlier. So we will in fact send out yeses or nos.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tila.
Mhm. Other questions on the timeline? Okay. Well, we're happy to keep answering questions. This is the list of folks on the Access Grants, the Access to Justice Grants Committee, just so you know. And we have a couple of liaisons. So it's a terrific group. Here is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us at these emails, and we will do our best to answer you. We will also redistribute the PDF RFP tomorrow, if not today. Thank you all. Thanks to our speakers who were fabulous and inspiring, and I think helped me to understand the bigger picture of both innovation and infrastructure. I'll stay on here. We'll stay on here answering questions. Those of you who need to can leave.
Any questions that came up in the chat that haven't gotten answered?
We've just gotten, I think we have answered this, but I'll just return to it. If we received a grant this year, one that started in April of 2024, can we apply this year? Meaning for year 4? And the answer is yes. It can't be, it's not continued funding for what was funded to begin April 2024. This would be some new project, but yes, you are welcome to apply for that. Let's see. So the ever popular question, if we've been awarded a grant this past year, we find it has taken longer than expected to utilize the funds. Can we use the funds beyond the granting period as long as they're still used. That is basically something you will need to email us about, and we will work with you on that. Yeah, we've got a request about the contact info.
I will put those in.
Mary is putting them in the chat. Can we get, this is a question that's come up a couple times. Can people get feedback on their applications last year if their applications were not successful?
Yes,
Stephanie, yes. How about that? I love questions, the answer to which is yes. So I think the greater detail, yes, thank you. We knew that would be the next question. Email me and I will move the process forward. Does there need to be a lawyer on staff, or can the organization do self-help with a volunteer lawyer? That's a rich question. Stephanie, do you want to take it? I can make up my answer.
I don't know that we've a formal position on that, so go for it.
I would say that if there's only volunteer lawyers, we probably are going to want to hear about how it is that they know the area of law and have some oversight or whatever. So just think about that.
Looks like Dario has a question. Did you want to come off mute?
Yeah, hey, thank you for this information. It's been extremely informative. So I'm at the Los Angeles Center for Law and Justice. We got a grant last year to upgrade our case management system, and it was great. I mean, like, we are rocking and rolling in the system, and it's really helped us out tremendously. You know, what we are experiencing is some holes in our data. So we're actually undergoing this huge quality assurance data project. And, it has a lot of different elements to it, data visualization and, making some upgrades to the case management system. So, what I'm concerned about is, as we move forward with applying that, we're not just, kind of trying to continue this previous grant that we did, because we've already made this transition. We've already migrated our data, but now there is this, more of an infrastructure to build out this capacity within our agency, building out different dashboards so different departments can easily access the data that we have in the case management system, in our accounting system, everywhere. So we can, as we get or lose funding, we can adjust resources accordingly. We can build out our volunteer program or pro bono program. So would that be looked at or viewed as a continuation of what we got last year in our case management system? Because, there would be elements where we would upgrade or buy different modules that weren't previously purchased in that initial go. And then we'd actually be looking at hiring out or building out some brand new services for this data visualization. Maybe, getting a temp employee to help us get the data, like, going out and calling clients and actually collecting the missing stuff that I guess we have. There are other elements to this project that we have been discussing, but I'm almost wondering if it's just a continuation of last year or if this could be built as something that's brand new.
Do you want me to answer, Tila?
Please, Stephanie.
So my first thought is, if you are adding on elements that were not included in your first proposal, that would be eligible as a innovation or infrastructure grant. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the strongest proposal. And remember that you are looking at your proposal weighed against all the other applications that are coming in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it does make sense. So,
so it would depend. It would depend on what you are articulating as new and innovative or new and building your infrastructure for the future. and how connected or different that looks from what your last year proposal was.
Okay, thank you. I think this is helpful, and I'm going to go back to the team with this information so that as we start to formulate what this project looks like, we can really articulate and make it a very strong application, because they are very different, but I think there are these elements that are, it's kind of this upgrading, and I think, like you said, that's where it's kind of weaker. But anyway, I think we have a great project, and I'm looking forward to January 15th when we get our approval. So, and then hopefully next year, I hope I can be on the call to say, hey, this is what we did, with our grant. So anyway, that's it for now. Thank you.
Thanks,
Excellent.
Dario. Did we have any other questions? Folks can either pop off mute or drop into the chat. Questions are slowing down. And I did mention this in the chat, but in case folks didn't see it, the recording for this webinar will be posted on the Cal A to J website as well. All right, I think with that, we can call it a day, wrap up. But again, thanks so much to all of our speakers, and thank you all for the work that you're doing, and for being here with us today. We look forward to reading your applications.